Welcome to this edition of Queer Profits Podcast, where we dive into topics and issues nobody wants to talk about in the world and socially and in our businesses. Queer Profits is all inclusive. That means everyone is welcome, and that truly does mean everyone. If you've ever felt like you didn't fit in, that you didn't belong somewhere, you found your place. No matter who you are, no matter what you do, no matter anything in your life, we are all inclusive and we want to help everybody. So in today's episode, I'm really excited to be talking to Jacob Ratliff. Easy for Ratliff. See, I knew I was going to screw it up, right? We're going to talk about his organic client attraction system. Now, there's something that every business owner needs. So, and of course, we will, as always, talk about our three pillars: inclusion, community, and growth. So with that, Jacob, I'm thrilled to have you here today, and tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do.
Hey, Diane. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to see where this conversation leads us. Like Diane said, my name is Jacob, and I am a client attraction coach for primarily LGBT coaches who are in the health, wellness, and personal growth space. And, as you mentioned, Diane, the process that I help people with is the organic client attraction system, which at its core, as you were saying, these, three pillars, I was like, yeah, that's actually, three of the pillars of the organic client attraction system. Because when we're talking about business growth, often we really get so fixated on the numbers and the strategy and the tactics. But what would happen if we actually pivoted the focus and focused on building relationships, on including people that might not be included otherwise, and really just building that trust? And, it's a lot of kind of what we're trying to do as a community, as an LGBT community, in a business context, because that's the beautiful thing, is that it works. And there's not that, downside of, getting fixated, on the numbers, on the profit, because there's this kind of misconception I see a lot. It's, you can either have a great, amazing impact on your clients and on the world, on other people, or you can turn a profit. And those two things are not mutually exclusive. Right. And that's one of the values that I hold really, really dear to me, because, first off, I'm living proof that that's not true. And my clients are as well.
Yeah, I love this because so many times, as a matter of fact, I just had this conversation with somebody last week that, we have this idea that, well, I can't charge for this, or I shouldn't charge, this particular person is doing social impact work. And, the attitude is, well, I shouldn't charge very much for this. And I'm like, why not? Right? It's this piece of, I can't make a lot of money and have great relationships and be authentic and have a great business and care about people. And I think there's nothing farther from the truth. I think the more you build the relationship, the better relationships you have. And I don't think this, my clients are living proof of it, right? That the more you have that interconnectedness, most of us are not Bill Gates, right? We're not running Microsoft. We're not running Apple. We're not Toyota. We're not HP, right? We're small businesses that have a relationship. And if we're not the one with the relationship, then our team person, your people on our team are building those relationships with people. And, let's face it, who do you feel closer to? Who do you talk to, just in life about things in a deeper level? Somebody who's just an acquaintance or somebody who's a friend? It's the same in business.
It is. And, one of the other things that, people tend to harp on in the business world is authority, authority, authority. You have to build your authority if you want to attract clients. And there's a certain amount of truth in that. And also, what often happens as a result of that is that we're neglecting this intimacy piece. We're neglecting the closeness and these relationships that we need to build. Because, if So say you're a coach and there's one other coach who, and you're doing the exact same thing, and you're trying to go for the exact same client, the exact same single client. If you are kind of over here in a corner on your social media saying, look at me, I'm an expert. You look at all my authority and expertise. Aren't I great? But this other coach is actually building a relationship with this prospect. Who do you think is going to actually get that client?
So
It's the person with the
how does that
relationship.
other coach build the relationship that's different from showing their authority or expertise?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the answer is really simple in that it's you just show up as yourself.
Mm.
That's what it really comes down to, is that, when you show up as yourself, you do have this expert piece of you, and you can kind of demonstrate authority, but you're not doing it to demonstrate authority. You're doing it to show up and serve. And that's the difference there.
So how difficult is it, Jacob, for people to show up as themselves?
That's the $1 million question, because that's where people struggle, because in this relationship building process, we see so much posturing, so much, look at me posing with my brand new luxury car that they probably rented, but look at all my great success. And what that really is, and this is a symptom of overthinking what it takes to show up. One of the ways that I build a lot of relationships is in direct messaging, whether that's text message, on Facebook, whatever. And when I was just getting started, I struggled a lot, because I would get a message and I would sit there thinking, oh my goodness, I have to come up with the perfect response to them. I have to say the right thing that makes me look like an expert, that continues the conversation, that kind of points them towards maybe getting on a call with me, do all these things. And I would just overthink it and kind of become paralyzed. So the transition for me was I had to just kind of type out the first thing that came to mind. Like I am just kind of having a conversation with a friend, maybe over a beer or over a coffee. And that was like that was the mindset shift for me. Was, I was trying to sound natural, and I was trying to achieve these, specific objectives in a conversation. But in reality, it was, oh, I just need to say what comes to me, and trust in myself that whatever I say is the right thing.
And so do you believe that if you do all that, right, you're authentic and you just say what comes and whatever, right? Then do you believe that, because this is always an interesting conversation, right?
Mhm.
If the person that you're communicating with decides not to do business with you, is is that because of who you are? Is that because it wasn't a fit? Is that, you know, I believe that when that happens and somebody says, that's great, but you're not my person, that just simply means that they're not the right person, or I'm not the right person, right? But there are people who struggle with the whole, like, oh, I got rejected, for example, or that piece of what did I do wrong, and then we get into that whole mindset and that whole beating ourselves up about, oh, I screwed that up. I had money in the bank and now it's gone.
Yeah, it becomes not just it's not a good fit, but a kind of a read on us as a person. It feels like it's a reflection on us as a person being rejected, not on our offer or whether it's a good fit. And one of the things I realized early on was, like, yes, it is important to see it as a business conversation in that respect, and not to take it personally, but like that's way easier said than done. So if we kind of backpedal and look at earlier on in the conversation, what I was doing, and I see this with my clients a lot, kind of when we start working together, is kind of prescribing onto someone that they are an ideal client, rather than having the conversation to figure out if they're an ideal client. And that makes a huge difference.
Great.
When it comes to, when that rejection comes up, because if that rejection comes up, it's an answer to the question, are they an ideal client? Not a rejection of like my prescription that they are an ideal client.
Wow, that's great. I've never heard anybody talk about it that way. That's really that's that's something you should rewind and re-listen to. It's that important. Like seriously, that's really a great way to think about that, from the piece of, yeah, we jump into every relationship, thinking at the very, oh my gosh, it's a potential new client, right? Well, maybe not, right? If we step back and say, is this person the best fit for me, right? Instead of looking at it and saying, oh my gosh. And I think that the people get into that mode of, I need business, and so we'll take anybody, and then it's not a fit, right? And I think this prescription versus seeing if they're right for me is it's a small distinction, and yet it's huge.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, I took a client that I was really excited about. I was in this space where, I, really couldn't turn down the money. And I was excited about working with her, and it wasn't a good fit. And the really beautiful thing is we're really good friends now. I had lunch with her last week, and it's this idea that, just because they're not the perfect client, like, doesn't mean that you're not still creating a beautiful relationship.
Right.
Because as you can tell, like, I had lunch with her, we stay in contact.
Right.
She provides a lot of value to my life, and I provide a lot of value to hers. Not a client though.
Right. Isn't that great? So let's back up for a second and talk about, one of the things that you said was, when you DM a person or you text them or whatever and start this conversation. So let's talk about some of that specifics, because there's nothing worse. Okay, there are worse things, but but it's gotten to the point where it's really bad, right? As soon as somebody friends you or connects with you on LinkedIn or whatever the case may be, now they're in your inbox in LinkedIn or on Facebook or wherever it is, and they're hammering you, right? It's not an introduction. It's not a let's get to know each other. It's a, hey, Diane, this is what I do, and here I made this, here's a link, and it's an immediate turn off, as opposed to this nurturing and building of the relationship piece. So can you talk to that a little bit about like what that process is, and maybe some tips on how to do that in a way that isn't so like, hey, I'm Diane, want to do business with me?
Yeah, exactly. The first thing I'll say is that it's, when those cold pitches come into the DMs, it's like the classic case of that prescription of like, hey, you're my ideal client, let's work together. The same thing that I was just talking about. But in terms of like the actual process of relationship building, when it's done right, because you're right, these, cold pitches in the DMs, oh my goodness. So the actual process of building the relationship, it starts with this kind of icebreaker type thing, where there's this piece of, okay, like, who are you? Why are you hitting me up in my DMs? And you, like, our job is to like overcome that, is to get past that initial awkwardness. It's a lot like a first date. It's, you're just trying to get to know each other. It's not even a first date. It's, if you're on, like, I guess, Tinder or something, it's that initial like awkward conversation. Hey, what's up? That weird thing.
Right.
But and then it's really about getting that back and forth going. Maybe it's around something that you're both interested in. Like, it doesn't matter if it's about your niche or if it's about your grandma's apple pie recipe. right? There's this idea that it has to be, we have to dig into their pain points, are you struggling to get clients right now? Do you have a really good client attraction process in place? Ew. No one wants to hear that in those initial messages.
Right.
Because even though that's not really pitching, it's too early. You wouldn't, on that first date say, hey, I think we should get married.
Right.
You're not going to do that.
Well, you might
Hopefully.
not, but
I might not. I won't. I wouldn't. I'm sure I know people do it. So building that rapport and just getting that back and forth going. And then, as that happens, starting to, talk about pain points casually, kind of without an agenda. And this is more of a mindset piece on our part, more than anything else, is what are we actually trying to do? And, when we talk about cold pitches in the DMs, those people are viewing the DMs as, okay, this is a pitching tool. But when we're talking about DMs, what we're really talking about is this is a relationship building tool. Pitches do not happen in the DMs, should not happen in the DMs. It's the purpose of the DM is to build that relationship and to find out if there's someone that you think you might be able to help. That's it. And then if they are, get them on a call. And if they're not, great, you still have this awesome relationship. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So do you script these? Are they all pretty much the same? All different.
They are not the same. I really highly recommend against scripts, and specifically with this, because everyone is different. And what might work as a really good conversation for one person might just completely turn someone else off. And that doesn't necessarily kind of equate to whether they're an ideal client or not. It's just people are different.
Right.
And the other piece of it is when we're using scripts, they by nature sound really scripted because they're scripts. And it's really important when you're communicating in the DMs to be yourself and to sound natural. Because if it feels scripted to you, it feels scripted to them. If you send a message in the DMs that feels unnatural or awkward to you, it feels unnatural and awkward to them too.
Right.
So there are certain, things and principles, I would say, that kind of go into this. And that's what I really try to emphasize. For example, one of the principles is, if we're trying to dig 20 feet deep and, into their pain points and everything, we don't just start digging 20 feet deep right at the beginning. No shovel can do that. We dig 3 feet deep. So instead of asking a 20-foot deep question, we need to ask a 3-foot deep question.
So give us an example of a 20-foot question and a 3-foot question.
Yeah, a 20-foot question might be, so if I were talking to someone, it might be, what does your client attraction process look like? Or are you attracting enough clients? A 3-foot question would probably be something more along the lines of, hey, I really appreciated what you had to say in this, specific post about body image. How did you discover this niche?
Gotcha. So then how do you get to, and I'm not asking you to give us your proprietary detailed stuff, but how do we get from 3 feet to 20 feet, right?
3 feet at a time.
Okay, right. And so how do you take the conversation of how did you discover body image as your niche to, okay, do you need more clients?
Yeah. So, and this is the part where this is why I say scripts really don't work here, because it's based off of how the conversation goes. Because if we say, okay, I'm going to ask these, this series of questions, it becomes an interrogation,
right,
rather than a conversation. And interrogations aren't fun.
Right.
especially when it's a stranger on the internet.
Yeah.
So, for example, if, this coach responded and said, yeah, I struggled with my own for a while, and then I discovered this really great process and, started to see that it got really great results for the people I was working with. I was like, I might be like, great, what kinds of clients do you work with within that niche?
Right. Perfect.
And you start, you can kind of start to see how that gets a little bit closer to the conversation of.
So you're really responding to their response to you to get to from 3 to 20, 3 feet at a time, depends on what they say to you. So it is actually a very individualized kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because if you have this checklist of questions you're kind of running through, it's just not gonna work.
So, Jacob, the thing that people are thinking, right? And the thing that people are going to object to with this is, oh my gosh, this is so time consuming.
Yep. I hear that a lot. And the truth is that it's really not. It really depends on the process and how you're conducting that conversation. If you can spend an hour a day, that's enough. And most people I talk to, I say, can you spend an hour a day? And they say, yeah, of course I can. I can find an hour every day.
Right.
So it comes down to the process and how you're handling it, the workflow, how you're managing it, so it's not overwhelming.
Yeah.
Right. Because if you're, spending the whole day, getting notifications on your phone that, okay, this person responded, that becomes overwhelming really quickly. And that's what we're afraid of is, oh my goodness, I'm just going to be sucked into spending my entire day on DMs. And I've done that before and it's not fun.
Right.
So it becomes more of a question of, how are we going to chunk this and manage it so that it fits into your schedule?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then as the process gets going, the next piece of the conversation is, okay, what are the pieces we can outsource? Because now that the system is working, now that you're getting clients, you can afford to outsource several things if you need to. Yeah. So great, let's talk about that then.
Right. Right. So let's talk about bots, because bots have become a big thing, right?
Yes.
With the DMs. And let's just, there's nothing in business, in my estimation, that's 100% bad or 100% good or it's right all the time. But give us a little feedback on, your feelings about the use of bots.
Yeah. So first off, just like logistically, if Facebook catches you using a bot, they will shut you down, unless it's on like a business page. But what we see a lot is people using bots on their Facebook profile pages. Don't do it. It'll get you shut down really quickly. Now, where we see a lot more of those bots and automations is on LinkedIn. And a relatively recent thing that LinkedIn has done. Have you heard about this?
I'm not sure.
You know what I'm talking about? Okay. So formerly, LinkedIn allowed you to reach out to 100 people a day, 100 new people a day.
Right.
And that's why people were using bots, because they were like, okay, we can reach out to 100 people a day. We're going to do it. We can't, have personal conversations. So we're just going to automate that. And that's, part of kind of what you were talking about, just like getting so many people messaging you their pitches, basically. And recently, LinkedIn has changed that limit from 100 people a day to 100 people a week, which when that change started to go into effect, I was talking with a lot of people who were so angry. And I was sitting there saying, I actually think this is an amazing and a really good thing. It means that people's inboxes aren't going to be flooded as much anymore. I've noticed it in my inbox in LinkedIn personally over the past few weeks, because this change has really come into full force in the past 6 weeks. I think it's a great thing, because what LinkedIn is effectively saying by that limit is that bots aren't going to cut it, because we want our users to have a good experience.
Yeah.
We want our users to build relationships that actually matter.
And I think even more importantly, what they're saying is we really want this to not be a mass, kind of deal. We want this to be a relationship building, one-on-one, kind of format. It's a bit, from a business perspective, and even personal. I mean, I have a good friend who says it's not about B2B or B2C, it's about H to H, right?
Yep.
Human to human. And I think if we would remember that a little more often, we would look at things differently.
Yeah. I mean, and if you just look at, okay, so, you reach out to, say, 700 people a week under these old restrictions. Maybe you get one client from it. Those numbers are not really good. I would much rather reach out to 100 people over the course of a week and get 2 or 3 clients from it.
Right.
Because it's automation, it's a spectrum, right? Automation's on one side, and getting hyper personal and relationship focused is on the other side.
Yep.
And what LinkedIn is saying is, hey, we're favoring this hyper personal.
Yeah. So do you think that the relationship piece of all of this, we've talked a lot about it, and then I also said, look at, HP and some of these other companies who don't build their businesses that way.
Mm-hmm.
So how important, why is this building the relationship thing so important for businesses like yours and mine, whereas when we look at these big companies that we often hold up as the ideal, right, or as the model,
Mm-hmm.
are really not doing that?
Yep. It has everything to do with what it actually looks like kind of on the flip side of once you have them as a client, right? So, for me, I'm a coach. The way that I work with my clients is really high touch, really personal. Therefore, my marketing and sales process reflects that. On the other hand, HP sells you a computer, might give you 90 days of phone support, and then kind of you're on your own.
Right.
And so their sales process mirrors that. And also, they're a massive company, right? They have spent the years building up that brand and that brand recognition. And I guarantee you that when HP was getting started, when, Steve Jobs was working out of his garage, Jeff Bezos, whomever you look at, they were all doing that relationship piece.
Right. Yeah. So let's back up for a minute, because one of the things that you talked about a few minutes ago that I want to sort of expand on a little bit is you talked about this idea of, people, their authority and all that. So do you see a difference between somebody who is an authority and somebody who's an expert?
Oh, absolutely. They are 2 completely different things. There are billions of experts in the world. There are, for example, my mom is a physician. She is an expert in her area. She's not the authority in her area, because an expert is someone who basically knows it all, or just knows more than the average person in a particular space. An authority is someone who does have that, but is also recognized as someone who knows all of that, who is an expert. So we have, basically, if we want to break it down, it's experts and recognized experts, prominent experts who are kind of, at the forefront of conversations. And that's the key difference there.
It's interesting to me, because I always say to people, if you know 10% more than somebody else, you're an expert to them.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Which to me means, you're a recognized authority to them, right? Maybe not to the world, but, when you establish that expertise, I think many times inside of your client base or inside of your niche or whatever, you are an authority, maybe not to the world, maybe not in this huge picture kind of thing, but I think sometimes they certainly run, hand in hand.
Oh yeah, it's all about scale, right? My Facebook group that I run, where I have, several hundred LGBT coaches and leaders, I am the authority in that group.
Right.
My mailing list, I am the authority to that group.
Right.
Now, when I go into a room full of other marketers, at a conference or something, it's just a room full of experts, and maybe there's several, authorities, the keynote speaker, for example.
Right.
So it's always about scale and location, kind of where are you
Yep.
In that context.
Yep. Yep. So you talked a little bit ago about sort of the numbers and the strategy and the tactics, and I'll be the first to tell you tactics is not something that I ever talk about, because tactics are short-lived, and most of the time, by the time you learn a tactic, it's not working anymore anyway. And typically a tactic is, in my estimation, a little bit more, not always, but a little bit more manipulative, a little bit more maybe black hat instead of above the board. But talk a little bit about, because I want to be really clear that to me, both are important, right? You've got to know your numbers, you've got to be strategic, you've got to use leverage, you've got to have all of those things. And you have to build a relationship, right? You still have to make people feel like I'm sitting out on the front porch in the rocking chair with a glass of iced tea kind of thing.
Yeah. So there's really three kind of layers to it. So the first is like philosophy and core values. This is what you hold, to be true of yourself and of your business. So, for example, in my business, one of the key values for myself is helping other people share their gifts with the world. And that's something we don't want to, gloss over in this conversation, because it often does get glossed over. The second kind of pillar here is that of strategy. So that is, how you go from point A to point B at a really high level. For example, strategy might look like, okay, we're going to get in front of our ideal clients, we're going to build these relationships, and we're going to convert them to clients. It's a high level approach. And then the third to me is tactics, right? That's what are we going to do at each point in this strategy to get maybe 1% closer to that point B. So for me, I don't see tactics as, black hat. Tactics are just things that you do, and they can either be really great, authentic tactics, or they can be really shady black hat tactics, kind of like you were saying there. And so and the reason I talk about these three pillars is that at every point of these pillars, they need to be aligned. Your philosophy has to align with your strategy, has to align with your tactics, what you're actually, sitting down and doing on a daily or on a weekly basis.
How hard is that, Jacob? How hard is it to align those three things and stay kind of congruent, if you will?
To answer your question, pretty straightforward. It's difficult. Now, what I will say is that, looking at philosophy, strategy, and tactics and aligning these, usually what happens when I'm working with, new clients is we look at, what they've been doing, how that's worked for them. And I would say 90% of the time, the breakdown occurs not kind of a misalignment across the board, but a misalignment between tactics and philosophy. And that's why I highlight the philosophy piece, the values piece, is that oftentimes, we're kind of, I'm going to say forced to do tactics, strongly encouraged to leverage tactics that to us don't feel authentic. And while they might work, they might align with the strategy piece, when they're not aligned with us and with our values as humans and as entrepreneurs and business owners, we don't get results from them because we're fighting ourselves to actually sit down and do the work. And it's the same thing with kind of DM conversations. If, it feels unnatural to us, it feels unnatural on the other side. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, that's great. So do you do other client attractive strategies other than social media?
Social media is the big one. And, it is the big one because, if we're looking at strategy versus tactics, right? Person A's strategy and tactics can look really different than person B's. And so, for example, this can be as broad as, okay, for someone, LinkedIn makes the most sense. For someone else, Facebook, all the way down to how you're actually getting in front of your ideal clients. How are you engaging? How are you starting conversations? That can look really, really different. And that's why, it has to be so highly customized to someone's niche, to their values, just who they are. So social media, to answer your question, is the biggest piece of it. And also I do talk a lot about, social media is the best place to start. If you're, under 10K a month, it's like the lowest hanging fruit for you. And also, once that machine gets working for you, and you might have outsourced a couple pieces of it, the question is, okay, how are you going to generate leads kind of in mass at a higher frequency, at a higher level? So that's when a lot of my clients kind of graduate from just doing social media to start adding other things into the mix. Email list building, partnerships with other businesses, a lot of different kind of high level tactics. And the reason that is that when we're building a business, there are two kind of main types of tasks. The first tasks are kind of what we normally think of. I call them builder tasks. So these are the tasks that are more centered around building that long-term sustainable business. So these are things like building an email list, regularly publishing a blog, for example, things that are really great and amazing, but produce results maybe after a year or after 2 years. Whereas we also have these driver tasks, which are the shorter term things you can do that generate results in a matter of weeks or months rather than a year. So, and the answer is not that, driver tasks are better than builder tasks or vice versa. You just have to split your energy. Because for someone who's just getting started, these driver tasks, engaging on social media, having conversations, that's what's going to get them the biggest and most immediate result. And it's also important to be looking to the future, right? Because I don't know about you, but when I started, I did not want to be having, a million DM conversations every day for the rest of my life. It was a finite thing. Because
Garland,
while
when
I was
started,
doing,
there was no such thing as a DM. There was no such thing as the internet when I started. So
okay, maybe not when you started.
so you see these, this is called a stamp. It goes on an envelope, and these self-stick. But when I started, you had to lick them yourself.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
But and that, I'm actually really glad you mentioned that, because as the internet has come into being and evolved, we tend to think of it as this still think of it as this new scary thing where we don't quite know how to leverage it to get new clients. But Diane, when you were starting out, how did you get your first clients?
It was old school. We did direct mail and classified ads and, word of mouth and referrals and, all of those things. And it's always interesting to me now how, we're so focused on the online thing, and that's great. And it's necessary. And it's a part of what I certainly recommend with my clients that they do. And it's also the thing that I think people don't get is it's also the most crowded space. It's also the space where you're going to go that you're going to have the most, if you believe in competition, which I don't, but it's the noisiest place you go. Right. So if in fact you will spend real money, because you're investing money on social media, it may just be your time, but there's a cost.
Yep.
And people don't think of it that way. Right. But when we have to pay for envelopes and stamps and all those things, oh, that's real money, right? Quote, real money.
Yes.
If you're willing to invest real money in your business, and I'm not saying don't do these other things. It's important, right? But the reason people go OOB, that means they're out of business, right? Is that they become one focused in their marketing, right? Never put all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
So be utilizing different marketing strategies in order to get your clients. But it's that piece of, because we think of social media as free, it's not, because your time is your most valuable asset, right? That's where people have a tendency to start in today's world. And I think it post, where we are now, we're not post pandemic, but 18 months or whatever it is in, it's even more crowded than it was 18 months ago, because everybody's on, quote, everybody, right? Not everybody, but way more people have become to an understanding that they needed an online presence than ever before in our history.
Yeah. And a couple of things, the first being that, you said you focused a lot on word of mouth and referrals, which are relationships, which means it's actually this just like kind of translating these skills that, we might be used to doing more so in person,
right,
onto the internet. So it's actually nothing new. Like, communication has not, at its core, has not changed.
right.
Human communication has not changed, and it's the same concepts.
Yep.
And the second thing you mentioned was something that I have totally forgotten about now. So I will probably interject in a minute to, once I remember what it is. I love when that happens.
It's okay. It happens to all of us. It happens to all of us. So is client acquisition and client building different for us as the queer population, the LGBTQ population? Do we need to do different things? Do we need to do things in a different way? Or is that just the niche that you've chosen?
So it's the niche that I have chosen. And the reason I chose it is, as I was starting my business, as I was getting my first clients, as I was kind of treading water, trying to figure out what I was doing, I was in a lot of, so I was in, two main spaces. The first one was, groups of other entrepreneurs, where it was more of networking or learning together. And it was not a space that was conducive or helpful to me. It was a cis, straight, white, frat bro circle that I just did not get any value out of. It was more draining than it was life-giving to me. And the second was, I was working with a lot of clients that our values didn't align, or, I was out, but my sexual orientation didn't come up ever. But I always had this thing in the back of my mind where I was like, I knew that if it came up, it would be a thing. It would be a whole problem.
Right.
And that was really draining for me. And I had to start kind of leaning into this idea that I don't need to like project myself as a, this ideal of a, entrepreneur, of a business person, that I can just show up as my whole self, real gay, and that's okay. And it was that discovery, as I started to do that, that's when my business really started to take off. That's when things really fell into place.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my goodness, like, if I can help other people do this too,
right,
that's just amazing. And so, in terms of, do queer people need to do things differently? The answer is no. What you have to do is show up as your full self. Now, the challenge is that it's a lot harder to do that as a queer person than it is to do that as, what we see when we look at most circles of entrepreneurs, cis, straight, white men. That's the challenge there.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting, I think, because for me, if we don't push ourselves to be in those environments, then we lose we sort of lose the diversity. We sort of lose the inclusion piece, right? I mean, we can be inclusive and do those things inside of our community, but I think we lose both things. You know, it's an interesting dichotomy, right? Because I totally get where you're coming from, right? That piece of I don't fit here, you know, I can't quite be out enough, but I'm not in the closet. Where does that fit? And do I lose, you know, respect or business, or, you know, what do people think? And you go through all of that in your head, right? When you're in those environments. And for me, what's interesting is I sometimes even do that in LGBT events. It's like, you know, I talk a lot about, you know, are you gay enough, right? Which is, to me, is a stupid thing, but
Yep.
but it's part of our culture, right? And so it's interesting having that piece of, I finally just decided that, you know what, I'm probably not gay enough. I'm definitely not straight enough, right? I'm definitely not feminine enough, and I'm not butch enough, and I'm not all of these things. And yet we concentrate on what we're not, instead of looking at it and say, how does Diane be her authentic self? How does Jacob just be who Jacob is, and let people either accept or reject that, want to do business or not do business? And Jacob or Diane know that it's not about me, right? Their decision to do business with me isn't personal. It's just they're saying no either to the opportunity, or they're saying no to right now, or they're saying no to, you know, I'm not the right person, and God knows I'm not the right person for everybody, right? But it's that, right? Instead of internalizing that rejection, or automatically turning it to, oh, you didn't do business with me because I'm a lesbian, or because I'm trans, or because I'm gay, or because I'm brown hair, or because I'm fat, or whatever the thing is, right? It just wasn't the right fit.
Yeah. And, you know, actually, to circle back to, you know, I was talking about these entrepreneur spaces that I was really highly uncomfortable in. And I took a step away from those, and I, you know, kind of began this process and the work basically of, you know, leaning into my most authentic self and showing up in my authentic self. And now, when I show up in those same circles that I was before, I'm a different person.
Yeah.
Because it really wasn't as much about the actual, you know, circle or the people, as much as it was a thing about me.
Yep.
Being insecure in my own identity.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Good. Jacob, best business advice you have ever received or want to sort of leave people with?
Yeah. So the best piece of advice I have ever been given, you know, specific to the client attraction process, is if you need a sale, or if you are scared that you're not going to get a sale, you're not going to get a sale. That's been huge for me. It's a lesson in moving from scarcity to abundance. It's a lesson in really showing up to serve rather than to get a sale. And it's also just practical business advice if you want to make money.
Yeah, that's the truth. Yeah, it's amazing how when you let things come to you, instead of, you know, I call it, you know, pull marketing as opposed to push marketing, right? When you let things come to you and put it out there, and then let it be, if you will, it's amazing what happens instead of always trying to push.
Exactly.
Totally different, totally different vibe, totally different place that for you to be personally, and certainly a different place for you to be inside of your business. So well, this has been amazing. You know, it's interesting. We talk so much about client attraction and client acquisition and building your list and doing all those things, that it sometimes all feels the same, but it's your take on it, you know, especially the piece that you gave about the prescription at the beginning, I think is so unique and different, that I'm just really glad that we had this conversation. I do want to add before I let you give your contact information. The interesting thing, one of the things that you said about like building your email list and those kinds of things, I want to give just a little different perspective. It shouldn't take you a year or two to build an email list that makes you money.
I can agree with that.
You know, that should be a relatively quick process if you do it right. And so many people don't
Bingo.
do it right. Right.
Yeah.
And so I just want to clarify that piece, because there certainly are what I would call foundational pieces in your business, things that you have to do to build the base. I think one of the slowest ways to get business is networking. because typically that is one of those, you have to see you come more times, you have to, it's like, oh, and people, many times people are starting out, that's where they go to and I'm not picking on any particular, I won't even say it, but go to this networking event, find networking events. Why? You get, and it's time consuming. It's not an hour or 2 hour meeting. It turns into 4 hours of your day because you got to get dressed and, travel and drive and all of that. So, go ahead.
When you're building your business, you want to get in front of your ideal clients. Exactly. So unless your ideal clients are the people in these networking events, that's why it takes longer. Whereas, compared to an email list or a really targeted social media approach, that's getting in front of your ideal clients.
Yeah. We sometimes we do things because they're easy, right? As opposed to effective and produce the results that we want. So
exactly.
Good stuff. Well, Jacob, if people want to talk to you about working with you or getting more clients and that sort of thing, how do they get in touch?
Yeah, absolutely. You can check me out at jacobratliff.com, or you can just search my name on Facebook and, add me as a friend. And I also have an LGBT friendly coaches and leaders Facebook group that is a really amazing community of mostly LGBT coaches who are really committed to making a massive impact. So it's a great networking space. It's a great learning space. And it's overall just a lot of fun.
And there's never too much of that. Well, Jacob, This is great. I want to thank you for your time and for your energy. That's a wrap, guys, for today's edition of Queer Prophets Podcast. I want to thank you for being here, Jacob, as well as you for listening or watching, depending on where you are. Whether you're queer or straight, these are all issues that all of us have in our businesses and certainly sometimes in our life, right? So if you want to make your businesses more profitable, you can always go to the free report that I have for you, the 3 keys to growing your business fast, getting more clients and making more money. That's at queerprophets.com. Go get that today. It'll take you a whopping, like 33 seconds or something. So go do it right now. As always, we'd love to hear your comments and your suggestions. Queer Prophets Podcast is all about bringing our entire community together for the good of all of us. As business leaders, I believe that we can do just that, right? We can bring our community together. That starts with each of us one step at a time, because unity, integration, and acceptance, that starts with each and every one of us. So again, I'm Diane Conklin with Queer Prophets. Until next time, make it a great day. Thanks again, Jake.